See you dressed up, Jake.
All right, welcome to the Grand Solar Minimum channel. Tonight we're going to do something a little different. Normally I have Lee Wheelbarger on, and Lee is a wealth of information. But tonight we wanted to reach out to another individual. His channel is called Ice Age Farmer. Am I allowed to pronounce your first name, or are you just...
Absolutely, sure thing.
Christian, thank you for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's my pleasure, Jake and Mari, and thanks for having me on.
The reason why we kind of reached out to him, and we talked a little bit beforehand, and you know, there's a lot of people that talk about what to do, but there's a very few people out there that actually are doing what they're saying. And we noticed that about your channel. The first time I've seen your channel was you were in a discussion with Morning Dew on one of their hangouts, and I saw in the background you're growing back there.
That's right.
If you wouldn't mind telling me, or if you're allowed to elaborate, what kind of operation as far as like...
I'm absolutely allowed. I mean, that's what my channel is about. I am allowed very much so to elaborate.
Okay.
So yeah. So I mean, the thing here is that I think the data is, you know, I was listening to the show last night. Lee really spoke well. The data is staring us all in the face, and the conclusion is hard to avoid when you're looking at that data. And just the fun part, briefly, is that even if you haven't reached that same conclusion, there are actually numerous perfectly valid reasons to take control of your own food sovereignty, right? You've got big ag producing their GMOs. You got the big state trying to take control of everyone's food supply because they want you to be dependent on them. You've got Carrington events, the CMEs that could be coming naturally from the sun, and there's more of those lately. We saw that the power outs in April was crazy. Radiation from Fukushima, the economic woes, the political strife, you know, World War III looming on the horizon, and the man-made EMP. I think a lot of that is actually all concocted as a distraction from the natural events that are going on around us, because you know, the climate chaos is the giveaway, right? The very real thing that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out what's going on. You could also throw in the geoengineering just as sort of an example. Like that's also a tell that there's something, I think, going on at a deeper level than, you know, like actually the deep state was sort of service, and it's like we're seeing this sort of, I think it's a pretend battle between Trump and the deep state. Well, I would suggest that geoengineering reveals that there is truly a cryptocracy, a deeper state. And until someone stops or starts talking about chemtrails or what's going on there, then, you know, we know we're just seeing the show, the sideshow, the distraction. But yeah, no, I think these are all perfectly valid reasons to start growing your own food and take your food security into your own hands. I like to call these sort of the swords of Damocles. All of them are right over our heads. All of them threaten to come down and take down the system by which most of us depend, or on which most of us depend for our needs daily, our food needs daily, and take it down. So, yeah. I mean, the truth is that the edifice of the system that provides that security to us is crumbling. And underneath this superficial structure, we see just a fully rotten core. It's barely functioning anymore. It's very ugly. It's a beast of a system. And to see that, and then to continue to depend on that system for your survival and your family's survival, it's just insane, right? That's madness.
Yeah, and you know, you touched base quickly on control of our food, and it was your video you did about the owner of Amazon purchasing Whole Foods, and that, like, it wasn't just you. I was actually surprised that was making national headlines, but the mainstream media wasn't touching the points that you were touching. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I found it interesting that you know, I heard it on your channel first, and then I heard it in mainstream media, and I just kind of grinned a little bit when they left out, you know, they took out the important part, that what was really important about that purchase. You know, they just kind of, hey, nothing to see here, folks, just a rich guy buying up all the food. That's all. That's
right. And even the financial analysts sort of stopped short of going into the deeper. You know, that does mean that a lot of Americans here in San Francisco are walking around saying, well, I spend all my money either at Whole Foods or Amazon, so now all of my spending is going onto one roof. And they know that intuitively that there's something weird about that, but I don't think they can quite put their finger on it. But yeah, but I mean, you're dead right. This is yet another sign that the members of the cryptocracy, right, the wealthy, the elites, whatever you want to call them, I don't think they're that elite, are aware, very much so, of what's going on. They're actively working against any of us finding out what's going on, and they are positioning themselves to benefit from the grand solar minimum and the effects that are going to be coming. When you see Jeff Bezos purchasing the single largest distributor of organic foods in the nation, when you see Bezos Investments and Eric Schmidt's VC firm both as co-investors on the first rounds of funding for companies like Plenty, which is an indoor vertical growing startup that is getting plenty of press. They just bought Bright Agrotech, which is like Nate, Dr. Nate's company. He does a lot of aquaponics videos on YouTube. Basically, if you look for any aquaponics subject, you'll find Nate on YouTube. And he's very informative, but they just bought him out. So the big money has come in, the institutional investors and the guys that control these things, Eric Schmidt, Jeff Bezos. This is Google and Amazon incarnate. And they're just moving in to take control of the food supply. And they're doing that because traditional agriculture is already failing. And so, you know, you can listen to videos on YouTube and think these guys are crazy, but this is actually happening. And when you see big money institutional investors positioning themselves like that, you need to take this kind of stuff into consideration.
Well, and you mentioned aquaponics, and I've heard that in my comment section. Again, I'm learning just like a lot of people are, so I'm very green. I'm a novice. What is aquaponics?
Sure. So aquaponics is like it's a very self-contained way of growing where, so if you look at like aquaponics or even on a larger sense, permaculture, the general idea is that in our modern way of life, we just spend money on something and we kind of use it a little bit and we throw it away. And that's just a very narrow slice that we're very wasteful. It's a very narrow slice of this larger cycle. Everything on Earth that's natural has these large cycles. So aquaponics is kind of like a self-contained microcycle where you've got fish and you feed the fish. The fish emit waste, ammonia mostly. There are bacteria in a cycle. You know, anyone that does aquaculture, I should say aquaponics is a portmanteau of aquaculture and hydroponics. So you've got fish that you're growing, and then when you feed the fish, they put out waste, and that waste feeds the food, the plants. And the plants in turn are cleaning the water for the fish. So it's a self-contained system, and all you do is put in food for the fish, and you get out really rapidly growing plants. It's pretty nice.
Wow, that sounds very self-efficient. So how long have you been looking at this? Like how long has this been going on for you as far as the growing? Has this been something you just always done in the first place, or did something catch your eye, a story, or?
That's a good question and a hard one for me to answer. I think it's been, and maybe this is more true of folks than I would imagine, but it's been a very gradual awakening, right? Of sort of pursuing these various rabbit holes and going where they lead you. Sure. So in many ways, I feel like it's been a tremendously circuitous route where, you know, I just explored, you know, spirituality and any number of things that really don't necessarily flow into a conversation about the grand solar minimum, but actually it was pretty much a straight line from where I was as someone just beginning to look outward. So I've always been sort of a digitally focused person, building systems, really distributed complex systems, and totally becoming just investing myself and my awareness in these systems and an understanding of how they work and how you tweak one little parameter, and the complexity theory means that all these things are going to go out of balance. So it wasn't until I really took that way of thinking about systems and applied it into the external world that things sort of fell into place for me. And it was, you know, up until that point, that sort of skill set had served me well in a very narrow professional sense. And I just sort of trusted. And I think a lot of people are guilty of this. I will say that. I think a lot of people are guilty of this, of just trusting that the people who are, you know, in the heads, the board of education is probably doing what's best for our kids. The people who are the head of the FDA are probably doing what's best for our food and drugs. They just sort of trust that the people in these positions are actually looking out for our interests. And the bottom line with a big state is that's just not true. And in a lot of cases, it takes some element of pain to get people to question that assumption. And in a lot of cases, that when people start digging, I like to think there's a switch that's flipped, and they go into sort of like individual research mode, and that's when you start pursuing those rabbit holes. So yeah, so over time, to get back to your question, as I've learned more about, as I've seen more and more the extent to which as I said, the system that I depend on and that my family depends on for our daily needs is rotten and corrupt to the core, then I think it is incumbent upon us to start moving in the direction of becoming self-sufficient.
Yeah, we the conversation has become a lot real here the last few months. Mari and I have talked about that as well. Something we want to start featuring on the channel is, you know, we have a homestead book, and I'm not going to sit here and act like that I'm the #1 outdoorsman. I've got a lot to learn, and fortunately we do have some time. And that's why I think it's important that the conversation has to start now. People have to start becoming aware of what's going on around them. And I wanted to touch base real quick. You were talking about going through other rabbit holes to find this subject. And that's the same way I've arrived to what's happened. Lee kind of snagged me out by the neck with a cane, you know, like the old showstoppers, you know, and said, look, here's what's going on. And the sun's doing this, and here's why. And then he started teaching me about cloud nucleation, and, you know, it made sense. And his theory had always been, and this really helped me get out of these rabbit holes, was that if you can see it, then you can test it, and you could analyze it. And I can't remember the other thing, but, you know, that's how you know things are real. You can run tests, you can see it physically, you can measure it. You know, if you can't see it, it's not there. And then the next thing you have to start looking for is, okay, well, what's causing these issues in our atmosphere, with our temperature, with our climate? And, you know, the more Lee talked to me, the more I started understanding. I like I said, I still have a lot to learn, but it makes a lot of sense now. But I can see how these effects from what's happening, the beginning of what's happening, can be villainized by a lot of people out there who are ill-informed, or maybe just sick in the head. I'm not sure. So
yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, and you know, that I think a lot about that as well, because, you know, there are I guess there are people, as I had just phrased it, for whom the switch has not yet been flipped, and they don't investigate things deeply. They don't look frankly beyond the headlines, and at sometimes I don't even know that it's worth our time to try and break them out of that trance. It is a literal trance.
It's frustrating, and you're 100% correct, because no matter how polite and how kind you can be to these folks, they simply just don't want to hear it. They will deny any fact that you throw at them, and to try to help them understand. And it's unfortunate that there's so many people out there that are discrediting NASA and their work and other scientists, and I find it insulting, actually. But, you know, I don't care if you don't believe that we're going into a mini ice age, or if we're going to global warming. I'm not upset with you at that. All I'm here for is to raise awareness. I want the conversation to start, and then I want to start talking about solutions and how to get along. And that's it. I'm not here to predict anything or say how cold we're going to get, but I don't think it's very productive for either side, whether you believe in global warming or cooling. I don't think it's productive for either side to argue about what's happening. Right now, we need to focus on that. What are the facts? What have we seen so far? And the facts are coming in kind of alarming. In 2017, here on my side of the country, we're in Buffalo, New York. There's been so much rain in the southeast part of the United States. I think a meteorologist in Dayton, Ohio, I got a hold of him, asked him a couple questions. He's totally on board with global warming. He's a meteorologist. I've always looked up to him. I've always trusted him for the weather. And his reasoning for not believing in the trend that the grand solar minimums normally bring in was because there's just too many other factors in place. And then I left a link for Adapt 2030, and it was a recent one about the 18-to-1 ratio of record cold temperatures being broken compared to record heat temperatures being broken. And his reply was, it's fake news, that Adapt 2030 is fake news. And that's when I realized, like, this mainstream media will never talk about what we're talking about right now. And that concerns me a little bit, because they're not even willing to look at the fact. They don't even want to open the book and see what's in it. They're just like, no, this is what we've learned. This is what we know. There's no way we're global cooling. That's what it feels like to me. Like, they just don't want to accept new theories and new peer-reviewed papers, such as people like Dr. Kirby from CERN and the cloud nucleation theory and all that. You know, it's like, that's too new school for them, and I think it scares mainstream.
I think it goes worse than that. It's not that it scares them and they don't want to see it. They're actively holding the book closed. They actively are suppressing this information. And this is really obvious to me and I think it's significant. I think it's really significant. I put out a video about this yesterday, when we see NASA putting out this big press release and a nice produced video about the solar minimum and some like light and fluffy effects that it might have this, and this can be coronal holes, but no discussion of what that actually translates into.
Right.
And now when you go to YouTube and you type in solar minimum, you don't see your channel, you don't see my channel or Adapt 2030. You now see NASA's warm and fuzzy solar minimum video. And so it is as if, and I believe this is the case, they noticed that this meme had started to gain some traction, and they knew they needed to see that namespace with some videos that would keep people who are just sort of superficially dipping in and they hear the term, and so they go Google it real quick and then they walk away later because there's nothing there, right? It's just sort of they've muddied the water, and I think that's really significant that we saw that happening yesterday, because it means that our conversation has reached a pitch that can no longer be ignored.
Yes, and what I found really interesting to me with that NASA video, they showed how the highly charged particles enter the Earth, and Lee has actually told me how this happens as well. So when I saw this actually being done on NASA, to me, NASA almost is adopting the electric universe theory by showing where the highly charged particles are entering our planet. And if I'm not mistaken, that's kind of where electric universe, that's the way Lee has described it to me anyway. It's, someone asked me about if we're getting highly charged particles, how is our magnetosphere weak and not being revived by these highly charged particles? And simply because in electric universe, those highly charged particles enter in through the poles, just like they show in NASA in that video. So I thought that maybe it's just me, maybe I'm overdoing it, and but it just seemed a little interesting to me how NASA kind of agreed. And I don't care if you're EU or not. I think everyone should have their own opinion and do their own research and go with what makes more sense to them, and not what about your buddy says. If it makes sense to you, go with it. But I don't think it should cause a divide. And I think it's silly too in the community. I've noticed that some people don't take very well to EU people, and it's unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that. You don't have to divulge if you don't want to. I understand.
I was still thinking about how, we said that the sheeple are it's almost not worth talking to them yet, because it's not, you can't break through the trance. Yeah. But I'm still, what still is bothering me is that just as we see people who are so inculcated into the cult of global warming that they dismiss all new data that doesn't agree with it, or they just flip their models in a way that doesn't really make sense to fit the data. So too do I think, am I discouraged by the fact that when we talk to the Planet X folks or the pole shift folks or even the flat Earth people, they're violent. They are just virulently upset at you for having something that isn't exactly the words they want to use. And I I would say two things on this. First, even if our models are totally different, if they both suggest that we should be building a community, a resilient community where we're self-sufficient, then we should be working together.
Thank you.
And secondly, I don't see, given that that's true, and that should be the end of the conversation, even then, I don't see that these models are necessarily mutually exclusive. The poles are obviously shifting, right? I mean, that's something that we can see the data on that. So I don't know.
Yeah, some are saying magnetic pole shift. I've seen another channel mention it on his one of his videos 4 years ago. I don't really feel like mentioning him right now, but
sure.
A lot of interesting things happening, and it's like Lee says all the time, we haven't seen these things in 206 years or so. So of course, it's easy to misidentify with what's really happening and you talk about the violence of some of the other communities when you try to explain to them what they're looking at and the colors they're seeing, and you're right, they react violent. And that's due to their a lot of those channels that create the content are so dictatorish about it. They force it down their throats. They tell them this is the law, and if anybody disagrees, then they're wrong. They're just dead wrong, and they don't give an explanation to why or how. And that concerns me too, because that shows a lot of short-minded thinking. When you're not worried about something that's going to happen in 7 years, that to me, those are the people that are going to end. Those are the ones that's not going to survive this. The ones that think, hey, that's 8-9 years away. What's that?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at in the chat, I have a question here. It's talking about aquaponics. It's an aquaponics question. He says, what do you plan to use for your source of CO2 when the outside air will be too cold to use?
I hadn't really considered that the outside air could get that cold. As long as so I have had some interesting experiences lately just with the cold waves and the heat waves that have been hitting my area of the country. And it did cause some issues with my fish and with the plants, but which suggested to me that this might be a better endeavor to take in a more controlled environment inside. I think indoor growing is going to grow a lot. And that's not just based on the climate chaos we're seeing now, but as I said already earlier, when we see millions and millions of dollars, plenty, that ag tech startup that's doing vertical indoor farming is funded to the tune of like I think it's $36 million in their last round. So they are really well funded. And that suggests to me that indoor farming is probably where we need to be focusing our attention. Yeah, I don't know. Cold air in the aquaponics system to be circulated. I haven't really thought about that.
That was a question from, what was that?
That was from Adapta Dave.
That was Adapta Dave. That was the handle name on that one. So he probably threw you a curveball on that, but that's something to ponder, and that's good that questions like this are being asked. It's not to make you look like you're not intelligent, because obviously you know what you're talking about. But this is, like I said, this whole purpose of this is to raise awareness and try to figure it out now before it's too late. We can't wait until this shit's right. If anything, it could be pretty close to being on our doorstep. I'm anticipating a winter that might be a little more stronger than what we've had. I know here in Buffalo, the last 2 years have been pretty weak. You don't really see much winter effect over there, do you, in San Francisco, ever?
It was more that it wasn't that it got cold. It was more that we had a ton of rain, like more rain than so much rain, in fact, that the drought that most of people have been hearing about for years is just over suddenly. And it's hard to believe that much water could be replaced that quickly. Beyond that, though, I mean,
Florida.
That's right. Yeah. And then the Sierra Nevada, the snowpack hasn't melted there, right?
I was going to ask you about that.
It's only 100 miles east of me, and people are going to ski this weekend. So you do see it. It's just not like, it looks a little different.
I was going to ask you about that because I haven't heard about it in the news very much. Oroville Dam and that melt, earlier this year, they made it sound like that this melt was going to happen all at once, and 10 feet of water was going to head towards the dam. Is there any talk anymore about Oroville Dam? Last I heard something about November, they won't be able to have all the repairs done by rainy season.
I think they're in a world of hurt generally there, the engineers over there. It sort of became a trickle of headlines to the point where people got tired of it, and so they stopped covering it. But yeah, indeed, they were actively saying that the inflow from the melting ice from the snowpack hadn't been as great as expected, and we would perhaps suggest that that's because the snowpack isn't entirely melting due to increasing glaciation.
Yeah, but colder temperatures in the upper atmosphere. I mean, obviously.
But they are actively trying to manage that situation.
That makes sense, Christian, because there's been a lot of heat that way. And for the fact that there are people heading to the slopes this 4th of July weekend, I mean, that's not normal, is it? They don't keep their resort open this late in the year, do they?
No, it's extremely unusual.
I mean, and that's the thing. And people that are for global warming, that's fine. But the one thing that they don't understand is some of these records that are being broken, these aren't just 20-year records. Some of these are over 100, 125 years old. So we're seeing stuff that's, stuff that hasn't happened in a long time, and there's a good reason for that. So, I don't know. Is there any other questions in the chat, or did you have any questions for him?
Talking about growing indoors and outdoors. I think, the main reason we wanted Ice Age Farmer on is he is, in belief of the Grand Solar Minimum. He sees the challenges that are ahead, and he's sharing his knowledge about aquaponics and growing and sustainability on his YouTube channel. So I, would love to just spotlight channels like his that are a wealth of knowledge, that are willing to share and innovate and discuss and sort of brainstorm, ways for people to, you know, be more sustainable and be more, you know, stable in this volatile society, no matter what the reason is, whether it's a grand solar minimum or just severe weather or, you know, anything, just to be more mindful to how they're living. And, you know, I don't know. You want to fill in for me? It's late. Jake.
No, and it goes down to patience too. You know, we have to have patience with this. This is, I don't think this is something that's going to be a sudden impact. I mean, we're going to see this over time. We're going to notice our food prices going up over time. You know, again, I don't want to be a prediction. I want to be ready. And the next question I was going to ask you, Christian, was when things get to the point where you really have to rely just on what you produce, what are some of the things that you're going to grow in a period where you have to rely on what you produce?
Sure. I hope you're right, Jake, that we have a soft landing here. You know, when I study the possibility space of how this could go out, then it's clear that there is like there's constantly an immediate risk. I mean, I already enumerated some of the swords of Damocles, but that CME from the sun and the one that we saw in April that wasn't even an X class, but still managed to bring power outages to like 17 different metro areas. That's a slap across the face to anyone who thinks that things are just fine and we can turn on our lights tomorrow and they'll be there. So I hope and pray for the soft landing, and I think that the fact that it's not necessarily a sure thing means that it just makes it all the more important that we already start taking steps every day towards self-sufficiency, even in whatever capacity, wherever you are, you can afford. I think that's just, it's mandatory at this point. To your question, what is it that, you know, and again, hopefully it's a soft landing. And so this is something where we can augment what we're getting from the store now. And as those food prices rise, we can remain solvent and keep paying the bills, as well as enjoy some food that we're growing, you know, on our own. But in a worst case scenario, if the food stopped coming in from the store altogether, the things I'm looking at right now, I sort of break down food into two different areas. One is nutritive, right? What is the food I'm going to eat that's going to give my body what I need to survive? And then calories, where do I get the energy just to burn to get through the day on a sort of like a machine sort of setting? And then nutritive is the more interesting question, because there are some exotic solutions that like you wouldn't have known about if you were just doing, I don't know, a couple hundred years ago before we had the information age and you could reach out and see technologies or plants or whatever that's growing around the world. And at this point, we can see spirulina, which is this algae back here that is sort of a superfood. Like it grows a tremendous amount of protein by weight, and it's packed with tons of stuff in it. Even more of a superfood, so much so that it's called the multivitamin plant is the moringa, and you absolutely should check out this plant. The moringa tree is prolific. So I started a few trees a month ago, and they're already like a meter tall, 3 feet tall, and they can grow to be three meters in their first year. So they grow ridiculously quickly. And my hope is that I can sort of get these running where I start up a batch of trees and then harvest them 3 months later, and you know every couple of weeks or whatever the frequency needs to be on some cadence, start up that next batch and keep it producing, because just a few of these leaves and whatever you're making for dinner for the calories could get you over that could basically satisfy your body of what it actually needs. I mean, there's plenty of case studies of moringa as a very cost-effective way to curb malnutrition in third world and developing areas. So it's a well-studied plant, and it's a cool one. It's very tropical, which means that it could be a challenge in an ice age to grow. But yeah, it does speak to indoor growing and working in.
What do you think a shelf life of? I mean, let's just say you do a good job of harvesting as much as you can. What's a shelf life on something like that? Is it something that you can just keep around? It's properly stored?
The moringa, yeah, you can actually, it depends. You can actually dry out the seeds and the leaves. And so I think you can buy powdered moringa. You can definitely buy powdered moringa leaves and then just add that to your smoothies or whatever. But you know, you need like some equipment to do that, to do the powdered freeze drying. So I don't know. I think it'd be better I always think it'd be better to have fresh living foods. That's it's kind of a different conversation, but switching to a living diet, like the main thing that's made the biggest dent in me growing the food that I eat every day is the microgreens, which are immediately behind me. And because the aquaponics work great, but it's still, you're waiting a month for a head of lettuce, which is faster, but it's still, how many freaking trays of aquaponics can you afford? I just don't have that much space, right? It's not a realistic way to rapidly grow micro harvests and keep these things going. The microgreens are amazing because you can plant them and 3-4 days later, you've got just a tray of fresh living greens, which are full of enzymes that you need to digest the rest of the nutrients you're eating. And it's just, it's fantastic. So the microgreens have been for me a terrific way of making a pretty significant, I think 30 or 40% of my diet now I can attribute to that.
You know, I'm hearing you talk about what we're gonna be eating. Is that us?
It shouldn't be.
Oh, anyway, sorry.
We're gonna echo.
What I'm hearing you talk about what you're growing back there, and it's amazing that you're talking about you're growing herbs that we add to our food, so we could have a small amount of food to eat. But with these plants that you're growing, they will give us the nutrients we need. So it's really interesting to hear. Like I was waiting to hear things like you're gonna grow carrots and potatoes and stuff like that, but you're really thinking outside the box. You've really put some time into this. So that's, you know, and that kind of work I really appreciate too, because this is the kind of things that people need to know. Mari was shaking her head in agreement that the first thing that you mentioned, spirulina,
superfood.
as soon as you started talking about it being a
Oh,
superfood,
man.
she was like, yes, it's amazing.
That stuff is fantastic.
So these are the things that we probably do need to talk about besides the obvious. You know, I was thinking about, I sound like a moron now thinking about it. What do I want to grow in my garden?
Jake is a guy that doesn't really eat vegetables, so I sort of pity him.
I'm probably gonna be the one that suffers the most during this point in time. I'm gonna
eat that beef now, baby.
I'm gonna eat leather with A1 steak sauce on it. Just pretend it's a steak, like it's just real chewy.
So headed towards the chat, I'll share some interesting comments. Summer BC, he or she has shared this in the chat before. Alaskans build 2x4 grow boxes on the ground with a plastic plate on top, and they just wipe the snow off in the morning for a small greenhouse. So I guess they are in Alaska, and they have 30 of them, and they have little 2x4 grow boxes covered in plastic, and even in the snow, they're able to grow.
And those are the people we need to be listening to, because if they're already growing in Alaska and they're finding out ways to grow in the cold weather, that's the kind of information I really want to hear as well.
That's right.
Like how to, and sharing people that know how to do it and bringing them on the channel, and that's exactly why we have you on right now. Your channel is very interesting. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to screen share, Jake, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Briefly, I appreciate that, and I just want to add that it seems completely daunting from where we are as people who are like plugged into the modern lifestyle, and we're not thinking about these problems before, to suddenly ask yourself, crap, how would I come up with all the stuff that I eat every day? And so I guess two things on this. The first is that it is as much changing what you eat on a daily basis to be what you can make as it is growing that food, right? Yeah. I don't know if I said that well, but it's not just that I'm going to go start growing Big Macs in my garden, because it just doesn't work like that. So I have to adjust the way that I...
How'd you know?
Yeah, sorry, Jake. I have to adjust the way that I eat so that it matches the kind of food that I'm able to produce. And then speaking to the Alaskan situation, like, yeah, people have been, we like I said, it seems daunting, but we're in a really good situation because people have been solving these problems for a very long time. And in the situation, I think, well, at least personally, I find myself in, is not that this knowledge isn't out there, but that I don't know what it's called. And it seems like we are now responsible for pulling together these pieces of the puzzle. Because in the permaculture world, they talk about, a climate battery and keeping storing the heat of the sun and the earth by day that radiates out into your greenhouse by night. And in the housing world, the alternative housing, it's called earth berm houses, or Wapini greenhouses, or straw bale, or earth ships. Or different people have taken these core philosophies of self-sufficiencies and codified them into their own language and their own way of doing things. But these core concepts are what we need to find and mine and bring, I think, as you said, to everyone right now.
Well, and I'll tell you what, we're looking through your channel right now and showing everybody the videos, and I see the views. We want to help increase this, not because we're trying to make you popular, but you have a lot of good information. This stuff is what we need to be focusing on too, not just talking about what's going on and what could happen, but these videos are real live action, not just talking about being self-reliant. You're actually giving tips. You're showing people how to do this. You're documenting what you're doing. And, hopefully we get to look at this for a little bit longer, and you call it a soft landing. And yeah, you're right. I guess I'm just a hopeless romantic and hope that we do get that soft landing. I don't want to come off as, gloom and doom, but the more I do my research and the more conversation I have with other people about it, it doesn't look good to me anyway in the next 15, 25 years.
It's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah. So
it's just good to give you a platform and show people on our channel that you are a definite awesome resource for starting out, growing, and to me, you're one of the few channels on YouTube that are into the Ice Age and survival and all that. So we're definitely pleased you came on. Do you want to tell us about your website?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I can be found at iceagefarmer.com. And then I'm rocking, of course, twitter.com/iceagefarmer, facebook.com/iceagefarmer. But the main platform is the channel. That's where the videos go and are linked to from the blog. And there's, I appreciate everything you said. I think there are as many questions in those videos as there are answers. And a part of that is because community, I think knowledge and skills are what we need to bring into this, but also building community is probably is the most important thing. And that's why spreading awareness so that we can build that community is absolutely fundamentally important right now. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I look at my channel as I'm not trying to be, I want to reach out to people who, how can I say this? Maybe not just your average guy who just wants to have a few things answered. Layman's terms. I got Lee to explain to our brilliant subs. We've got tons of ideas that come in every day. I'm very impressed with the following that this channel has. And so Lee, thanks to him, he really helps put it all into perspective. But everybody is doing their part right now from what I see. And like I said before we started this show, I really think there questions or answers, your work is still appreciated. Nobody else, I haven't seen anybody attempt to do what you're doing right now either. So instead of talking about it, you're actually doing it. And that to me, that's what it's about, is action finally. And, and hearing you talk about some of the things you're growing, like I said, to add with our regular food, for a guy like me, it is alarming. We take for granted the food supply that we have now. I can't imagine the average waste in a household right now. I tell my kid every day when he's eating dinner, be very thankful for this food tonight. Don't you dare waste it. Trust me on that. I'm trying to teach him that we take things for granted, and stuff like the comfort that we have right now is, how much longer do we have with that? How long can you afford it?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be the next question, before you finally have to go off the grid. But it seems like you've got a pretty good handle and a good head start going right now. So
Elvis has a question. He wants to know, how are you making out with natural medicines?
Sure. So I am definitely trying to grow a suite of different herbs that I think are have a number of uses. And I don't know how else to say this other than I think the even in today's life, the number one thing you can do for your health is to clean up your eating, right? So if you're eating those Big Macs, you're not gonna. I just don't think you're gonna feel good. And moving to a diet of living things. There's a reason when you look for like cookbooks of living fresh foods, raw foods, these kinds of things. There's a disproportionate amount of these authors who are like stage 4 cancer survivors. And it's because these are medicinal diets. These living foods are, they are just packed with the life energy that we need to survive. And when we're going and eating dead processed foods, it's sapping our energies to try and live off those things. So number one, I think, is nailing your diet. And you know, the frequency with which I get sick as I've made the change into these living foods, and even more so with the stuff that I'm growing now, I feel great now. So I guess that's my number one answer. But yeah, and first aid is a different thing altogether. But I don't know if I answered that question very well.
Well, and you know, the diet is, you know, Elvis, that's a good question, but you're right, Christian. Diet is everything. I used to weigh 307 pounds. I'm down to 215. I've had it all for 10 years, but I can tell you, when I was that big, how miserable I felt every day. And I didn't want to go to work, and I didn't want to do anything with my kids. You know, my routine was McDonald's in the morning for breakfast, McDonald's for lunch. And then, you know, I was a bachelor, so I would have a large pizza to myself and a 2-liter. I mean, this was my diet every day. And then as soon as I changed that, which I'm not a healthy eater now, but I don't eat in the quantity and the amount that I used to. But I think the point that you're trying to make is that there's foods out there that we may not like in taste, but are good for our bodies and give us the fuel that we need. And the quicker we get used to that, and that feeling that we'll get with it, is going to be well worth it. I think today's society, we give up nutrition over taste, and the taste always seems to lead us to the problems with the heart and overweight and diabetes. And I got diabetes at the age of 24 due to my diet, and I've done so much damage. I still have to rely on insulin, even though I've cut out, you know, sugar sodas and all that stuff. But, you know, I think the reckless diet had a lot to do with my health being the way it was at a young age, and still today. So you're absolutely right. The first aid will be minimal if you take care of yourself and find the right diet for you and put the right things in your body. And it's easier said than done, because I can't tell you how many times I'm like, all right, Monday, that's it, broccoli and carrots, and that's it, nothing else. And then Monday comes along and we're going to get Chinese takeout. So, you know, it's about discipline, but this is something that's going to have to become a necessity.
I bought, there's actually a book. I'll have to dig up the title for it. But there's a really good reference guide that covers all edible plants and does a huge overview on plants for medicinal purposes. And it's probably one of the best books I've come across about. The title is escaping me right now, but I will dig it out and share it. We'll actually do a video on it. That goes right hand in hand with the homesteading book I have, that just gives you those little bits of info to go off of. But I think knowing your herbs and knowing medicinal, you know, medicine, how to treat yourself, even, you know, if you have a cut or something, there's Mother Nature gives us all we need.
Sure.
So, you know, we have to share that information. We have to educate ourselves, you know, to do that. So, and I'm reading the chat right now, and there's a lot of people that are getting into it. I'm just going to scroll through here, and there's some people talking about chickens and chicken coops and that kind of stuff. So,
yeah, I mean,
moringa, just as an example, moringa is actually an astringent.
There's a lot of people talking about moringa burgers. What's a moringa burger?
Nice. I don't know. I'll have to find out about a moringa burger. I'm looking forward to it already.
Sounds delicious. I want a moringa hot dog.
He won't, like, listen, I can't even get him to eat salad half the time.
Hey, I had a tomato on my cheeseburger the other day.
Well, can I put lettuce on your sandwich, Jake? And he's like, he like cringes, like the thought of it is like something green and leafy.
You know, the one day you did put lettuce on my sandwich, I have to admit it was crisp and refreshing. I was like, but I didn't want to admit that to you. So I didn't want you to know that I liked eating lettuce.
Because I could eat salad every day.
And I think it's different for everybody, and like you should listen to your body. That's the number one piece of advice is, how do you feel? And if it feels good, then go for it. And if you feel bad after you eat bread, then you don't have to be fully gluten intolerant. It just
Sure.
makes you feel bad. And so stop doing it, right? Whatever your body tells you, listen to it. It's giving you really good feedback in a lot of cases. And we just think, oh, I'm having a bad day or whatever. And on top of that, Jake, I just want to sympathize a little bit or empathize, I should say, because dude, for me, there's like if I indulge in a bunch of bread or carbs, so I'm just like, screw it, I wanted some pasta tonight. There's like a 3-day hangover addiction, sort of it's like quitting cigarettes is right up there with quitting carbs for me, because everything changed. Though even exactly when I see green, I'm like, I don't really want to eat that stuff right now. I want to just go take some pasta or some bread and like dip in olive oil and just eat carbs. Oh man, carbs, I want carbs. And it's a craving and it's hard to break. But after a few days of that living food, it starts to, again, you get to the point where you're like, bread, it's dead. Why would I even put that in my body? I've got like really good plants over here. They're alive like I am. And so there's a perception and a taste flip that goes as you're making that very real physiological switch.
I know it's real. A friend of mine, he did a very good job on the presentation, but he was showing me the benefits of Kangen water. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but you're talking about foods that are alive. This was water that was alive. And it's like highly charged water with these electrolytes and all kinds of other things that's going on, like alkaline, all that.
Yeah, it's alkaline water.
I'm not gonna lie, I sat in the room with him that he gave me this pitch, and I drank probably 4 or 5 cups of the stuff, and I could instantly feel like it was putting oxygen in my brain and my blood. I felt like I had a buzz, but I wasn't drinking alcohol. I mean, you know the difference between alcohol. And I guess I kind of understood what it felt like to go to an oxygen bar, and I understand why people do that now, but that's what this water was doing to me. So I'm totally on board with eating alive. I understand what you mean now with that. And I 100% believe, like I said, I've drank water that I was told was alive with ions and alkaline and all that stuff.
It's like alkaline, it's like ionized.
But I definitely felt
alkalinity.
I definitely felt the benefits of drinking it. I did feel different. I did feel more refreshed. I felt more alert and awake.
I have a friend that had thyroid cancer that was on a strict diet and alkaline water, and she went to her doctor and wound up beating the cancer with her diet.
Wow.
Not that that's everyone's case, because when I say that, people get all defensive, like, oh, that's not real. But, you know, I've seen it happen to, you know, my own friend who had thyroid cancer, her turn around her diet, and now she's cancer free. So I can't explain it. I just find it amazing.
Well, and Lee Wheelbarger is also on board with diet. He's constantly, he knows I'm a diabetic. He's always sending me articles, foods, what to eat, what kind of herbs, what kind of things that would cure diabetics without insulin. So definitely be more aware of putting and I want to have you on a hangout one night. I think it would be an interesting conversation to watch you and Lee kind of bounce things around. And like I said, we got hopefully Dave from Adapt 2030. We're hopefully lining something up with our schedules. He's a busy guy as well. So, but Christian, we're going to sign off. But did you have anything else before we took off for tonight?
I just wanted to thank you again for having me on. It's been a pleasure to hang out with you here and to share some great information with your viewers. So thanks very much.
Yeah, Christian, we'd love to have you back on again as a frequent guest. We value what you're doing, your knowledge. And we really appreciate you coming out tonight and having a conversation. Let's get the ball rolling for sure. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you around soon.